Welcome to this section. We want to look at 2023 WASE objective questions. So if you pay attention, you understand why each option is correct and why other options are wrong. Now, the first question here says, the underlying principle of the concept of separation of powers is mainly to test your knowledge on why there is separation of power, why Baron de Montesquieu propounded the theory of separation of powers and is being constitutionalized in our modern democracy to separate the executive arm from the legislative arm. In fact, to separate the three arms of government. Now, is it to educate the people on their rights? It can protect. Separation of powers can protect, helps to protect rights of citizens, especially making the judiciary independent, but it's not to educate people on their rights. So option A can be the answer. Option B says ensures constitutional review. It has nothing to do with to ensure constitution. Whether you separate or not, constitution can be reviewed. Now look at this. It says to tame the executive. It's not actually what you're doing in separation of powers. Yes, we know that at times it is the executive arm of government that tends to be very much more powerful, but it's not really, it does not target the executive exclusively, but rather the option is C, which is prevents arbitrariness from either the executive or the legislature. Is to prevent arbitrariness, which is related to dictatorship. Arbitrary rule is when that's any arm of government can wake up and do whatever it likes without recourse to the provisions of the constitution. So separation of power prevents that. So C is the correct option. Now, what is commonly referred to the association of the government and the governed? Is it monarchy? Monarchy is a form of government where the head of state is a king or queen, where ascension to the throne is through hereditary. So it has nothing to do with this. Look at option C, says confederation. Confederation, that is a union that's made up of a league of nations made up of independent and sovereign territories that still maintain their independence, and the union is to achieve a common goal. Now, it is not a confederation because it's not about government and the governed. It's not a federation. Federation is a system of government. Now, rather, if you remember the definition of state, a group of a politically organized group of people occupying a defined territory under a government that has the power to make and enforce laws within its territory without any form of external intervention. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that it's dealing with the association, organized group of people. And remember, we talked about people must be there, the governed, the government must be there. So it's an association of the government and the governed, that is the state. Then number 3, the exercise of power can arise from any of the following sources, except the question tests your knowledge on sources of power, which is part of the basic concepts in government. In fact, the first basic concept you learn in government is it, let's start from, is it legitimate power? From legitimacy, that's the acceptance, the support of the people. Yes, because legitimacy has to do with the support and recognition and acceptance of the people. So you can get power from the support of the people. You can get power from one's charisma. Somebody can command obedience due to his or her innate qualities. You can get expert power. One can get power from the knowledge the person has acquired, the expert. So the power of the doctor to ask a male doctor to ask a female patient to strip naked so that he can check what is wrong with the person, even in the private part. Of course, it's an expert power. Now, D, ideological power. We don't have ideological power. Power is not sourced from ideology. No. So D is correct answer. Now, There are two types of committee system in the House of Parliament as part of their operations, and one of such is, do we have expert committee? In fact, you have what we call standing committee and the committee of the whole House. In some cases, rare cases, there could be an ad hoc committee. Now let's look at, we don't have expert committee. We don't have parliamentary service board, it's not a committee. We don't have leadership committee. Rather, what you have is committee of the whole House. Committee of the whole House is when the whole House want to look at a particular matter. If you're talking about House of Representatives, Committee of the whole House involves all the members of the House of Representatives coming together to look at a particular matter before them. Now, question 5 says, maintenance of law and order in a state is the function of the dash. Now, who maintains law and order? In most cases, is the you use enforcement agencies to maintain law and order. You use those that implement laws to maintain law and order. So the judicial service does not maintain law and order. The legislative arm of government only makes laws, but will not maintain law and order because they are not involved in the implementation and enforcement. Citizens of the state, they are not saddled with that responsibility to maintain law and order. Rather, it is the executive arm of government who implements laws and enforces laws, that it maintains law and orders, and in most cases with the law enforcement agencies who are under the executive arm of government. So that is why D is the correct option. The local government system assists best in mentoring and grooming people. Remember, people are the grassroots. 4, is it citizenship and justice? No. It can be for citizenship, that is how to acquire citizenship. It's not, they don't do that. Is it for military operation? They don't train for military operation. There is the armed forces that will do that. Is it for large-scale farming? What they are is for leadership position. That's the answer. Leadership position has to do with preparing them, training them on local politics, and which prepares these people for national politics to become either the president, House of Rep member, to become leaders at the various levels of government. So the local government does that. It's not to prepare people on large-scale farming. Now, let's look at the fundamental human rights and liberties must be entrenched in a constitution to A, make it difficult to tamper with. B, show concern for the people. C, serve the majority interest. D, espouse love for the country. Let's start from D. Espouse love for the country. Of course, fundamental human rights is not entrenched there to espouse love for the country. It's not there to serve majority interest. Minority interests must be served. It's for interest of all. It's not in the constitution to show concern for the people. It's rather to make it difficult to be tampered with, to avoid infringement on people's rights. Then, question number 8 says, an executive president is one who wields the powers of a. Now, where do you have an executive president? You have to understand it. You don't have it in a parliamentary system of government where the head of state is different from the head of government. Take Nigeria for example. In 1963, during our first republic, they say that we had a president who was a ceremonial president, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. He had ceremonial function. He didn't have executive function. He was never the executive. And we have the prime minister. We had the prime minister then, who was the chief executive, the head of government. Remember, it was in 1979 that we changed our constitution to a presidential constitution, where the head of state is also head of government, where the president became an executive president. Now, looking at the question now from the explanation, is one who wields powers of ceremonial president only. That is in a parliamentary system. So it's not the answer. B, leader of government business only. That is head of government only. No, that is, of course, no, it's not it. It would have looked like prime minister, but prime minister is never the president. C, despotic and benevolent dictator. Of course, it has nothing. It's not an executive president. We are talking about a democratic setting. No. D, head of state and the government. Of course, that is the correct option, because an executive president exists in a presidential system of government where the head of state is same as head of government. So D is the option. Then we have the official routine observed in carrying out functions in the civil service is commonly known as. What do you call the official routine observed? That is, those rules that must be adhered strictly in carrying out the functions. Now, what are they? One, we have official order. No, it's not standard order. It's not a command. Rather, it's what we call bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is that official routine or those formal rules that must be observed in carrying out things in a public service or in the civil service. And remember, you are taught that this is one of the problems, because they strictly follow these rules in carrying out activities. So C is the answer. The question says the Public Service Commission performs the following function. Remember, Public Service Commission or Civil Service Commission is the body responsible for the recruitment, training, promotion, and welfare of the civil service. So which one is not a function? Let me start from the advisory body. Of course, they play advisory role to the government due to their job. They recruit, they train, so they must advise the government on the civil service. Is it welfare of personnel? They see to the welfare of the public or the civil service. Is it discipline of personnel? They are also in charge of the discipline of public servants when there is need for it. Is it imposition of income tax? They don't have any business with imposing income tax. So A is the correct option. Now, question 11. The issues that are at the core of a country's foreign policy are referred to as. Now here we're talking about factors influencing a country's foreign policy. Is it A, diplomacy? Diplomacy, yes, is a concept in international relations that has to do with the country's relations with other countries, but of course it's not the core of a nation's foreign policy. As you see, state area, that's the state where the area is, though we know that location, geographical location of a state influences its foreign policy, but it's not at the core of it. Is it globalization? That is everything, or the whole nations are together in everything. But no, it's not. But it's national interest. National interest is number one determinant of foreign policy of a nation, which is the goals of the nation, what the country sees as a country to benefit. Now, one of the major criticisms leveled against the United Nations is its inability to. Remember, we're talking about problems of United Nations. A says, ensure universal access to education. Of course, United Nations is not saddled as a primary responsibility to ensure universal access to education. So it's not a problem. It's not being criticized for that. B, adopt universal language for its operation. of course, it's not expected to adopt a universal language for its operations. We have about 6 languages that are spoken in that are official to United Nations. Of course, you can't tell French to adopt English as the official language of United Nations, and vice versa, and even Russia, Latin, and the rest of them. C says fair permanent representation. Ensure fair permanent representation. This says enforce affirmative action on equal wealth. Remember, affirmative action has to do with the participation of women in politics. But if you look at C, ensure fair permanent representation, what comes to mind is, where are we talking about fair permanent representation? Where we have permanent representation is the organ of United Nations called the Security Council, where you have 5 permanent members. And of course, other countries, people have been agitating for the expansion of the permanent members of the Security Council so that other countries can be part of the permanent members. Now, United Nations have not been able to attend this agitation from other nations for expansion of the permanent representative in the Security Council. So, C, ensure fair permanent representation, we are referring to the Security Council, is the answer. Now, the question 13 says the function of diplomatic missions include the following, except. Now, diplomatic mission, we are talking about embassy, headed by an ambassador. We are talking about official representative of a country in another country. They have their embassies under the Commonwealth. They have what we call the high commissions, headed by high commissioners. Now, these are diplomatic missions. They are stationed in the country. They represent their country. What they do? What is the one that they don't do? One, do they gather intelligence information? Yes, they do. They gather security information for their country, in that country they are representing, in that country where they represent their country. So it's not the correct answer. Remember, we're saying except, which one is not their function. Project the culture of the people. Of course, where they are, they should project the culture of their people, of their country they are representing. See, woo investors. Of course, a diplomatic mission must be able to woo people, citizens of that country where they represent their country, to come and invest in their own country. So it's their mission to also woo investors. But do they pay salaries or workers of the mission? No. It is the government that sent these diplomatic missions that pays the workers of this diplomatic mission. So it's not the diplomatic mission itself. Question number 14 says, one of the functions of the electoral management body is to, which one? The option says 1, interpret the electoral laws fairly. B, look for external sources beside the government to fund its operations. Of course, they don't source for external sources. They depend solely on the government to fund its operation. C, engage in business to increase its financial. They don't engage in any business. The Electoral Commission does not have a mandate to engage in any business. It's not an enterprise. D, conduct training program for presidential candidates. They don't train presidential candidates. It's not their role. What are they training them for? So it's not in their core mandate. But if you look at A, interpret the electoral laws fairly. Now it's closed. It's closed. But it would have been the option if we say implements or enforces electoral law. It's the judicial arm of government that interprets every law, including electoral laws. The electoral management body will implement or enforce, but not to interpret it. That is why after election, people go to court for the court to interpret the electoral laws. So this option, This would have been the answer if it has implementation. Now the next question says, the rigid nature of a constitution is testing your knowledge on types of constitution. Remember, we have rigid and flexible constitution. Flexible constitution is a constitution that does not require special procedures for it to be amended. Rigid constitution, on the other hand, requires cumbersome procedure before it can be amended. Now, let's look at the option. Rigid nature of a constitution makes it A, easy for quick review. That is flexible, so it's not the answer. B, complicated for amendment. That's what we just explained. Cumbersome to be amended. It's not infallible and the standard. Of course, no constitution is infallible. No constitution is perfect. That is why there's room for amendment. D, accessible to all. No, it's not what we are talking about. We're not talking about accessibility. We are talking about amendment procedure when you're looking at whether a constitution is rigid or flexible. So that is why B, complicated for amendment. Bicameral legislature contributes to the democratic process remember, when you talk about bicameral legislature, you're talking about two-chamber legislature. Example, Nigerian National Assembly, you have the Senate, you have the House of Representatives. Now, bicameral legislature contributes to the democratic process by A, recommending the use of force in policy implementation. They don't recommend that. It's not why, in fact, you have bicameral legislatures. It has nothing to do with bicameral legislature. B, imposing programs and policies on the executive. Of course, you can't impose programs and policies. They are not. The legislature does not involve him. It's not part of policy making process. C, widen the scope of political participation. D, suppressing minority rights. Of course, you can't have it to suppress minority rights. Rather, it's widening the scope of political participation. If you have a bicameral legislature, people participate to contest for one chamber. People participate to contest. So you can imagine in Nigeria, we have 360 in House of Representatives. Candidates of different parties participated to get seats here. We have 109 senators. Candidates of different parties filed candidates. So you see, it increases the scope of participation as against when you have a unicameral legislature. So C is the answer. Now, the judiciary occupies, question number 17, the judiciary occupies an important place in every state because it is A, protector of the rights of people. B, a body of upright and just people in the society. They are not important because they are upright and just people in the society. Of course, they are not. That is not what makes them important. C, mandated to supervise the functions of the executive. It's not their duty to supervise the functions of the executive. They are not. It's the legislature that can carry out what we call oversight function on the executive. They are not important because a unique profession of intellectual. Yes, they call themselves learned people, but of course, it's not why they are important, because they are professionals. Rather, it's because they protect the rights of people, because it is their responsibility. In fact, among the three arms of government, it is the judiciary that is responsible for protecting the rights of the people. Question number 19 says, the French colonial policies in her West African countries were different from the British in many ways, except. So it's different in many ways, except one. A, it's different in cultural imposition. Yes, of course, there are differences in cultural imposition, while Britain didn't tamper with the culture of the people through its indirect rule system, where traditional rulers were used to preserve the culture of the people. The French tampered, imposed its culture through its policy of assimilation, where African cultures are supposed to be jettisoned and French culture picked up. So they are different here. They are different in citizenship. French granted members of its colony citizenship, French citizenship. Britain did not do that. C, discriminatory laws. Yes, the French had discriminatory laws, of course, for those they call the communes, or those 5 communes and the other parts. But they are not different in the whole thing. Is colonialism and imperialism is what is taking place and what they were doing. So they are not different in imperialism because it has to do with colonialism. The pattern of rule by the French in our West African colonies was highly. Is it consultative? They were not consulting. Is it proportional? It's not. It has nothing to do with what we are talking about. Is it decentralized? It wasn't centralized, but rather it was centralized under France. Laws made in France applied to their colonies. So it was centralized. And also, even within the colonies, there was one central. Dakar was the central authority. One of the negative effects of colonial rule on West African states was the negative, not positive. Now, A, building of roads and rail network, of course, a positive effect. Roads were constructed, rail networks were made during colonial rule. This is D, social interventions. Of course, there was social intervention programs that we benefited from. So it's positive. Western education is one of the positive impacts of colonialism. But dependency syndrome was the negative effect of colonialism. I illustrate. Before colonialism, we were producing what we are consuming. We produced what we consumed. During colonialism, they changed our economy in such a way that we produce to export what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce. So we depended on them to produce the things we use. So, and that thing has lingered till now. So dependency syndrome is one of the problems of colonialism. 21 says, unitary system of government is adopted by some state because A, it guarantees democracy. It's not because it guarantees democracy, because it's not as democratic as federal system of government. B, it builds the capacity of the people in good time. Federal can build capacity. D, because of rich and mineral resources, never the reason for unitary system. Rather, it's homogeneity. You adopt a unitary system in a homogeneous society, a society that is made up of people from the same ethnic origin and the same group. So you normally adopt it there. You don't adopt unitary in heterogeneous society where you have people of diverse ethnic origin. So let's go to the next question. Question number 22. This question says, question number 22. Apart from globalization, what other factor to a large extent affects the sovereignty of a state? 1. Is a right of franchise. The right of a franchise does not in any way, as we are talking about right to vote or voted for, does not in any way affect the sovereignty of a state. Is it inalienability? No, it does not. Which are we talking about? Inalienability of rights or inalienability of sovereignty? It has nothing to do with. We are talking about limitations of sovereignty here. Is it systems of government? The system of government does not affect, that limits the sovereignty of a state. But when a country belongs to international organizations, the country have to abide by the treaties of that organization, by the charter of that organization, and we are talking about the laws of these organizations. And these laws of these international bodies are what we call international laws. So in abiding by these international laws by a state, it can affect the sovereignty of the state. Example, there are some international laws a state can violate. It can lead to sanction by international organizations like United Nations. And because of that, the state may not be able to carry out some of the things it will like to do internally because of that fear of sanction, because of that fear not to violate or violating international laws. Now, look at this. The reason for which the government should take a key interest in the activities of pressure groups is that that's why government, we're talking about importance of pressure groups here. Now, A, they force coalition among political parties for election. The pressure group does not force coalition among political parties, that for political parties to come together in the parliament to form a government. No, it's not what they do. They blackmail political leaders. It's not what they do. D, dictate the path and direction for government programs and policies. They don't dictate that. They only influence. Then C, provide valuable feedback on government policies and programs. Of course, they give feedback to the government policy. That's why they react. That is why they when they are not comfortable, when it affects their members, they react to the policy. They try to influence government to change that policy, which is their primary objective. So government through a pressure group has provide feedback, valuable feedback on government programs and policies. Then election, question number 24, election plays a major role in the democratic process because it's A, project the class system. We're talking about importance of election, project class system, so that we have upper class, lower class. Election does not do that. It has no business with that. C confers legitimacy. That's B. C says ensures only good people rule. It's not the business of election to ensure the kind of people that we rule. It's the people that voted that we do that. It's not the business of election to manipulate the electoral, but it's not the rule of election. But rather, election confers legitimacy, that is acceptability and recognition, because election gives a platform for people to choose their leader. And when they have successfully chosen their leader, they will accept any person that will emerge from that process. And that acceptance is what we call legitimacy, and meaning that legitimacy has been conferred on that particular political leader. Public opinion is formed through the following channels, except A, mass media, B, elections, C, cabinet, D, political parties. Now, the question is testing formation, agents of public opinion, where we get our opinion, where we get ideas that influence our expressed views. Why do we express our views like this? Where do we get them from? We can form our opinions through what we read and watch in the mass media. We can form our opinion through what the candidate, that's the government, tells us, because the government has a responsibility. Whenever it makes any policy, it will take that responsibility. The cabinet, the ministers will take the responsibility to educate the public on that particular policy, to convince the public and seek the support of the public by convincing the public. So it's a public opinion is formed from the cabinet, which is the government, the executive government. D, political parties, of course, during their campaigns, during their debates, they even through their manifestos, they help to form our public opinion. But when it comes to election is the means to express it. Public opinion is a measurement. We measure public opinion through elections, public polls, referendum. So it's a way to measure, not form our public opinion. So election is the correct option. Question 26. The civil service is different from the public service. That is, here we are referring to public corporation. In terms of A, from D, political affiliation. Of course, none of them has political affiliation. C, personality and stature. Of course, it's not the answer. D, educational qualification. Of course, you have the kind of people you have in public service, that public corporation, you have them in civil service. Conditions of service are different between the public corporation and the civil service. Public service here represent public corporation that we are taught. So the conditions of service is quite different for their personnel. Then question number 27. The media, commonly referred to as the fourth estate of the realm, monitors the activities of government on behalf of the, is it the media organization? I wouldn't do that on behalf of the media organization. Is it the executive? It's not on behalf of the executive is the government, it monitors its activities. Is it the civil society? Is it the people? It's on behalf of the people. It monitors government activities on behalf of the people. One of the high points, question 28, one of the high points of the activities of National Congress of British West Africa of 1919 led to the, remember, and they had their meeting in Accra in Ghana, and they say it's a nationalistic organization. In that the activity, they came up with a communique, and this communique happened to be the demands they made on their colonial administration. One, it led to introduction of elective principles, which we saw in Clifford Constitution of 1922. So it led to that. They didn't propose for African unity. They didn't propose the creation of African High Command. African High Command was not created after their meeting. It was not. It didn't lead to Africanization of the Executive Council, because even the Executive Council that was created after it was all-white Executive Council. So they didn't achieve what they sought. The biggest obstacle, question 29, the biggest obstacle which also slowed down nationalist activities in French West African colonies was the, of course, this one is the policy, French colonial policy, the first French colonial policy that they later replaced, and that is the assimilation policy. It's not the assassination of chiefs, it's not the deportation of Africans to France, it's not constitutional reform and entrenchment, rather it's assimilation policy that substituted, that changed, tried to change African culture so that African, based on the fact, a belief that African cultures and traditions are inferior and should be replaced with that of the French culture. So actually, and even it granted citizenship to Africans. So this delayed nationalism in French West Africa, unlike the British colonies. Question number 30 says, the best way to keep military at bay from interfering in politics is by ensuring, that's what should be done, to avoid interference of the military in politics. Effective control of their day-to-day operation. Who should control it? They have a structure to control their day-to-day operation. So it's not it. Their inclusion in government, if you include them in government, you may cause a problem of intervention. High pay rise every year. It won't go a long way, but when you practice good governance, good governance is devoid of corruption and bribery, which is one of their reasons. Good governance gives dividends of democracy, like building of infrastructure. Good governance, the economy will be bright. So when you have good governance in place, of course, and we won't have some of the crises that led them to interfere in our governance. So good governance is the answer. Secret voting assists the voter in making a decision without. Remember, we have open balloting and secret balloting. That is secret voting. Now, is it makes voter assists the voter in making a decision without? I'm starting from the pondering over issues. No. Without public good. No. Without national interest. No. A sense of secret vote is for voters to vote without question, without force, without any form of intimidation, because it conceals the vote of the voter. So nobody knows the vote of the voter. And of course, you have party representatives. So if you do secret voting, it conceals who the voter voted, and that will shield the voter from intimidation that would have arisen if his vote is open to the people to know. Next question says, which system of government allows for and guarantees maximum competition? Where do you see competition? Is this social democracy that talks about socialism, where means of production are owned by the state? Of course, it does not allow competition. Is it communalism? Communalism, where things are commonly owned, does not allow competition because everybody owns everything. Is it feudalism? That is a system of land ownership. That is a form of government that is based on a hierarchical structure of land ownership. Of course, competition is not there because people work for their lords. But it's capitalism where you have maximum competition between the capitalists, that's the bourgeoisie. So it's capitalism because everybody is competing. You see where they are upgrading their products to beat the market, to dominate the market. Each capitalist wants to dominate the market. So there is healthy maximum competition in capitalism. We are private individuals own means of production, distribution, and exchange of goods and services. Question number 33. One of the factors that influences the centralization of powers in a state. Remember, when you talk about decentralization, what comes to mind is federal system of government. That's what comes to mind. That's decentralization. Now, one of the factors that influences the centralization of powers is, example in Nigeria, why do we practice federal system? Is it weak central authority? No, it's not. When you have a weak central authority, that is, you're talking about a situation of having a unitary system that has a weak central authority. No. Is it to guarantee maximum loyalty? That one is when you're talking about centralization, rather, where loyalty of citizens goes to only that central government. Is it C, widening political participation? Or is it D, maximum allegiance to the state? Of course, the answer is widening political participation. Example, if you come in a decentralized state like Nigeria, where you have the federal, state, and local government, people are participating in local politics. People are participating in state politics. People are participating at the federal politics. So you see, it widens political participation. People can participate at any level. So C is the answer. Number 34. One of the low points, that's disadvantage in the cabinet system of government, is that the A, Prime Minister does not regard the head of state. No, we don't have it in parliamentary system that the Prime Minister does not regard the head of state. Prime Minister respects the head of state. B, center of power in the system is stable. One of the, of course, is not a low point in a parliamentary system. Then C, divided loyalty of the cabinet ministers is strong. You don't talk about divided loyalty in cabinet ministers. Rather, tenure of office is not always stable. Remember, the Prime Minister remains in office as long as his party continues to control majority seats in the parliament, and also his The Prime Minister can be removed through and his cabinet can be removed through a vote of no confidence. These two factors make tenure of office not always stable. You can't say it's 4 years, you can't say it's 5 years, you can't say it's 10 years. It's not always stable. The party may not win majority seat again. Of course, the tenure is over. There could be vote of no confidence. The tenure is over. So D. Now, which type of rights enable citizens to participate in state affairs? Is it habeas corpus that talked about liberty of citizens being kept more than they should be kept in custody? That they cannot stay for specific amount of time in police custody without being told what they have done. Is political right. Political right, where you talk about right to participate in the affairs of the state, where you have franchise, right to vote and be voted for. It's not judicial right, it's not a social right. So it is political right, where you have franchise. Question number 36. The reluctance of military regimes to hand over power to civilian administration is because they, let me start from D, negotiate better loan terms for the country than the civilian government. Is not the reason why they want to stay in power. After all, they also borrow. C, have the backing of traditional rulers, their subjects and the clergy. They are not supported because the military normally take over power by force and suppress every form of opposition. So they don't have the backings of those people. B, perceive civilians and politicians as evildoers and backwards. Poor governance is related, but not that they see them as evildoers, no. But they feel a sense of entitlement. That is, they can do it better than civilian government. There are crises, things are going wrong, there's corruption, and they see themselves as savior that have come in to sanitize the society and do it better than the civilians. So that is sense of entitlement that they have. Now another one question 37 says, the following issues are some of the challenges the United Nations addresses, except. Yes, United Nations is concerned with human rights. It addresses the issue of human rights. That is why the current war between Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, you see United Nations deliberating on human rights, the rights of even the civilians. United Nations addresses the issue of humanitarian aid, especially in war-torn areas and areas that are affected by natural disasters. The United Nations, in fact, in some of their sessions, they talk about climatic change and its effects and solutions to climatic change. It's one of the major current issues addressed by United Nations. But oligarchical regimes is never addressed, is never discussed in United Nations. It's not their business about whether we have oligarchy or not. So B is the answer. Question 38 says the African Union is saddled with one of these challenges, and that is that's the problems of African Union. Is it weak labor force is not a challenge? Is it absence of natural resources? There is abundance of natural resources in Africa. Is it inter-ethnic extinction and poor social cohesion is not a problem, but rather tension and political discord among member states is one of the problems. At times there is political discourse, and that is why even it has an organ, a judicial organ, that will settle these disputes involving members. So it's one of their challenges, tensions and political discourse among member states. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is now confronted with a new security threat, which is worth. New one. Of course, smuggling of illegal goods across states is a problem today. We're talking about new security problem. As that weak national armies is not their problem per se. Is it proportional representation? That's representation in the organs of ECOWAS is not their problem, even. But it's extremism, example, terrorism, emanating out of a religious belief. That's fundamental extremism. So it's one of the problems of economic community of West African state. People attack others based on their conviction, their religious conviction, personal religious conviction. So it's one of their current problems. The Commonwealth nations is committed to the following principle. We are talking about principles of Commonwealth. What comes to mind? The first principle, human rights, of course, democracy, good governance. It's not supervise political activities of member states. It's not their duty to do that. Draft constitution for member states. Commonwealth of nations does not do that. Finance budget of member states. Commonwealth does not finance the budget of member states. Rather, in their principle, they have respect for human rights and democracy. And that was why, because of this violation of human rights, Nigeria under Sani Abacha was suspended from Commonwealth of Nations. South Africa was also suspended due to her apartheid policy. Let's look at this question. 41. Which one among the following is a significant factor that influences foreign policy of a country? That is, factors influencing foreign policy. Now, is it A, recruitment policy? That is how they recruit. The government of the state recruits its public servants. It does not influence the public foreign policy of a state. Is it the gender of political leader? Of course, gender of a political leader does not. If you're talking about the personality of political leader, it influences, but the gender does not. Is it A, educational system? The educational system has nothing to do with the foreign policy, but the political system. Example, if you're talking about a military system, which is usually radical in its foreign policy, it can affect foreign, it can influence foreign policy. If it's civilian system, it's usually conservative, it affects foreign policy. So B is the answer. The art of maintaining peaceful relationship between states, groups, or individuals mostly come about as a result of the activities and functions of who? I repeat, the art of maintaining peaceful relationships between states, groups, and individuals mostly come about as a result of the activities and functions of, is it the media? It's not really the media. The media does not negotiate the relationship between states. The media does not represent a state in another state. It's not the legislature. Legislature makes laws. It's not security agencies, no. But it's activities of the diplomats. We're talking about diplomatic missions. We're talking about the embassy of a country. We're talking about the high commission of a country in another country. What is their duty there? Their duty is to maintain that peaceful relationship between the two countries. One of the formidable, question number 43, one of the formidable challenges the new Partnership for African Development is confronted with. Remember, this program aims to alleviate poverty in Africa and place Africa on a sustainable growth and development. One, is it the absence of a common platform for debates is not a challenge. It is arms race among member states. That's where they are competing who will have the best weapons of mass destruction. It's not. Even Africa does not have such resources to involve in armed race. It's what powers that do that. C, over-reliance on foreign aid. D, absence of technology transfer. We can't say there is absence of technology transfer within African countries, but rather many African countries rely on foreign aid. So that's the answer. Question 44, the overriding consideration for the creation of new partnership for African development, NEPAD, was to place Africa on a path to, is it military might? No, it's not there for military. It's not a military organization. It's not a military program. Is it non-alignment? No, it's not dealing with non-alignment. That is to make a country neutral in its foreign policy, neutral before the world powers that polarize themselves into two blocks. It's not non-alignment. It's not capitalist governance. Rather, it is to place Africa on the path of sustainable growth and development in order to conquer poverty in Africa. A democratic country is one in which the people have the right. Is it to punish government by not honoring tax obligation? No. Let's see. Violently overthrow a government. That is, you're talking about military. It's not a democratic government. B, disregard laws they abhor. No, they can't disregard the laws they abhor. But rather, the people have the right to participate in decision-making process. Example, decision on who becomes their leader. They participate by voting and electing the person. Now, this question says, a state that has two levels of government is commonly referred to as, is it coalition government? That is a government made up of two political parties that come together to form it, usually found in a parliamentary system where no party wins majority seat. Is it concurrent state? We don't have concurrent state. Concurrent is found in a federal list where the federal government and the regions share function. Is it cooperative government? We don't have what we call cooperative government, but rather it's in a federal state that you have levels of government, like in Nigeria, federal, state, and local government. Question number 47. The cornerstone of a functioning democracy is the dash. That is what you must see, the feature of democracy. Do you see expenditure pattern of the executive has nothing to do with how the executive spends? Money does not have anything to do with how democratic a country is. Is it the appropriation bill, that is the budget bill? Whether democracy or not, there will be budget, of course. It's not the appropriation bill, of course. See, foreign policy and military allegiance has nothing to do with how democracy is. But the cornerstone of every democracy is that there must be free and fair elections to choose the leaders, because democracy is a form of government where supreme power is vested in the people. And these people exercise it directly or indirectly through their elected representatives. That is why we talk about free and fair election must be part and parcel of any democracy. 48 says, which of the following systems of government does not practice collective responsibility? Now remember, collective responsibility is a system where all cabinet members, all members of the cabinet, all ministers are jointly responsible for the good fallout of their policy or the bad fallout of their policy. That is, they take praises and blames together, and every individual is tied to every policy that comes, whether it's from the ministry of that particular minister or not. They jointly take blames and praises together. Now, this is opposed to individual responsibility, where every minister personally takes blame for the outcome of his or her policy. Now, the collective responsibility is found in a parliamentary system of government, while individual responsibility is found in a presidential system of government. Now, let's look at this. Which of the following does not practice collective responsibility? Cabinet system practices it. That is, you're talking about parliamentary system. The executive system, okay, let's look at this. Non-centralized system has nothing to do with collective responsibility, because we're talking about a federal system of government. When you're talking about collective responsibility, we are looking at the executive proper. Is it communalism system? We don't talk about collective. It's not practiced in communalism. It has nothing to do with communalism system. Rather, if it's possible, we can even talk about it in communalism system, if possible. But we don't talk about the term collective responsibility in communalism system. Rather, where it is not practiced, that you can see the individual responsibility, is the executive system. That is the presidential system. That is where the president is the executive president. You see individual responsibility rather than collective responsibility. So the option is the executive system. This executive system represents presidential system of government. Question number 49, a social, political, and economic arrangement in which landed property and other natural resources are collectively owned. It's referred to as what? Collective ownership. Is it liberalism associated with capitalism? No, it's not. Because in capitalism, you talk about individual ownership. And that is the liberalism is the ideology associated with capitalism. Is it federalism? We're talking about system of government. Here I talk about levels of government. It may be tempting to say feudalism because landed property is mentioned. It's not feudalism. Feudalism, landed properties are not collectively owned. It's the lords that are owners of the land. And rather, it is communalism, which is the crudest form of society that you were taught in government, where the landed property, the land and resources coming from it are collectively owned by the people, and everybody works in the interest of other members of the society. And finally, question number 50. A public declaration of policy and aims, especially one issued before an election by a political party or candidate, is commonly called, that is the policy of a party, the program of action of a party, which the party aims to implement if voted into power. Is it policy paper? No, there is nothing we call policy paper in government. Is it guide to government? Of course, they don't use it to guide the government, except when they come into power. Is it steps to govern? No, it's not what we call it. This is what we call party manifesto. That is the manifesto of the party. The program of action, documented program of action of the party, which they aim to put into power, into force, if voted into power. Thank you for joining me in this section. I wish you the best out there in your examination. Thank you.